You're preparing for an interview in English. You're qualified, you've got real experience, but English is your second language. So you're a bit worried about your level. And the truth is, I really believe that story is more important than grammatical accuracy in an interview. But there are three grammatical rules that are really important and can really affect your tone, how your message is received by the interviewer. Compare this example. I will measure success in this role by versus I would measure success in this role by. It feels small, right? It's one change of a modal verb, would versus will, but it can make the difference between sounding a bit aggressive or just right and respectful towards the interview process. The reason that I want to make this video is because even some very advanced speakers that I work with have problems here. Because it's, again, not about grammar rules, it's about the tone of your message. And that's what we're going to be speaking about in this video. What I want is that by the end of this video, you have the confidence to sound sharp, clean, and clear in your upcoming important interview. Let's get started with something simple: the use of the word will to speak about the future. So in an interview, of course, you want to speak about what the future looks like with you on board. So will is a verb that comes up a lot, right? But be careful here, because if you say something like, in this role, I will, it makes it sound like you've already been offered the position. When you're trying to describe what the future looks like with you on board, use the modal verb would instead. Would and will. These two words seem so similar, but in interviews, they play very different roles. Let's talk about them. We'll look at a few examples side by side so that you can hear the difference clearly, and then we'll speak about when will actually is helpful. So let's take a look at this first example. In this role, I will create a new intake system to reduce patient wait times. Okay, compare that to the use of would. In this role, I would create a new intake system to reduce patient wait times. So let's take a look at one more example. As I understand, on your team, I will lead the development of a more efficient onboarding process. All right, compare that to the same sentence with would instead of will. As I understand, on your team, I would lead the development of a more efficient onboarding process. So it's important to say that both versions are grammatically correct, but the versions with the verb would sound much more appropriate for an interview because grammatically they acknowledge that the offer has not yet been made. So here's the rule. If you're talking about what you plan to do, if you get the job, use would instead of will. For example, I would start by building relationships with my colleagues. Or in this position, I would define success as improving patient satisfaction. In this role, I would focus on strengthening the feedback loop between clinicians and the analytics team. If hired, I would begin by reviewing the current onboarding process to identify quick wins. I would aim to build trust with patients by standardizing communication across all touch points. So, why use would in these sentences? Because the job isn't yours yet. You're describing a future possibility, a future that depends on something else, an offer. Now, take a look at this version. In this role, I will start by building relationships. When a candidate says something like that, it sounds like they're assuming the offer is already in their hands. And sure, confidence can be seen as a very good thing, but this kind of language can feel a little bit strong, a little bit too pushy. It's not about being less confident. It's about showing that you understand and you respect the process, that you're professional and respectful of the decision that hasn't yet been made. Now, that doesn't mean that you will never use will. There are a few situations where will is completely appropriate in interviews. Let's talk about those situations. First, use the modal verb will for future decisions that are made immediately at the moment of speaking. So, this is when you're making a decision or offering something in real time, right in that moment. Imagine this: you're in the interview, and the interviewer asks you if you can send over your references. You say, absolutely, I will send them to you later today. That's not a guess or a plan. That's you deciding something right then and there. And that's one of the reasons where will works best. Secondly, use will to speak about future facts or certainties. Sometimes you need to talk about things that are 100% going to happen, facts that don't depend on you or the interview process. In those cases, will is the right tool. You might say, the internship will start in July, or this field will continue to grow over the next decade. You're not making a guess, you're stating something that's definite and going to happen in the future. Another reason we use will is for promises or offers, and this one is a bit tricky. If you say, I will take full responsibility for team coordination, that's too strong. It sounds great if you have been offered the job, if you're in an onboarding meeting and not an interview. But if you're saying that in an interview, it feels a little bit like you're assuming you've already been hired. So be careful with this one. Use it for offers you're making in the moment, not for what you would do in a job you're interviewing for. But if the interviewer, for example, again, asks for your references or additional information, or that you do a technical task that you take home and submit in a day, the correct response is, sure, I'll do it. I'll send them to you today. So, fourth, use will to make predictions based on your experience, things you know. For example, you might say, given the current strategy, the clinic will likely see a rise in patient volume. You're not making a promise, you're giving insight, you're giving analysis. And that's correct use of the verb will. Fifth, use will to describe some habits, and you'll often see this with verbs like often or always, though this can almost always be done better using the present simple. For example, I will often follow up one on one with team members. It's grammatically fine, it's a correct and appropriate use of will, but I would say here the present simple sounds more natural, saying instead, I usually follow up one on one. It's just smoother and easier to process for your listener. And lastly, and most importantly, use will to speak about polite requests or making offers. So, this is when you're asking a question in a professional, respectful way. Something like, will you need any additional materials from me? Will there be an opportunity to speak with any of the current team members? Will the next stage of interviews include a case discussion? And all of these are appropriate and respectful. You're not making a prediction or a promise. You're just using will to ask about the future in a clear, courteous way. This is especially helpful when you're trying to show tone. In English, oftentimes will is used to soften a question and make it feel a bit more formal or respectful. For example, I would be happy to walk you through that project in more detail if you would like. Will that be helpful? It's a gentle, polished way to check in and show engagement. So, if you're making a formal offer or asking a future focused question associated with an offer in a respectful tone, will is not just acceptable, it's preferred. However, if you're speaking about what the future would look like if you were hired, then use would, not will. Now, let's briefly talk about verb tenses, specifically the present perfect and the past simple. I know even for me, it's a little bit too much grammar, but stay with me because this one really affects how your experience sounds. The present perfect is used to speak about something that started in the past but still matters now. For example, I have led multiple trainings for new hires. I have worked in both inpatient and outpatient settings. And here, as a result of using the present perfect, you're not saying exactly when it happened. It's not the priority. Instead, you're putting the priority on communicating, this is part of my experience and is still relevant. This is part of what I bring with me on day one. So the past simple is different because, of course, it's used when something is finished. It happened once at a clear time, started and stopped. For example, I led a training session last March. I worked in the ICU during my internal medicine rotation. Both of these are correct, but they send different messages. So here's the risk. If you use past simple when you meant to show something ongoing, the interviewer might think it was a one time thing. Let's take a look at an example that shows this really well. I led quality improvement projects. Okay, that sounds like a one off event. It's not something you really do that much anymore. But if a candidate says, I have led quality improvement projects, it sounds like a strength that you bring with you. So here's how I recommend you think about this. Use the present perfect when you want to highlight experiences or patterns. And use the past simple when you're telling a specific story. Remember, the past simple is best used for actions that have a clear beginning and ending in the past. Okay, so far we've spoken about will versus would, when to use each of those. We've spoken about the present perfect and past simple, and the last one is going to surprise you. It's the passive voice. And I think this will be surprising because you have most likely heard English teachers say avoid the passive voice. And most of the time, yeah, use the active voice. It's clearer, it shows ownership. For example, I created the onboarding materials, I trained the new hires, I led the transition. Those are direct, they're strong. And hey, by the way, if you're getting content out of this video, let me know and give it a like. But back to grammar now. Here's something that you might not have heard before about the passive voice, especially for interviewing, because sometimes the passive voice can really be helpful. Let me explain. Many interviewees, they want to sound collaborative, so they use collective language, which at work is great. It's respectful, it's diplomatic, it's polite. For example, we created a new intake system. We implemented a new protocol. And yeah, definitely, this is language that is diplomatic. Use this at work, but the interview is the one exception. Why? Because the interviewer is interviewing you, not your team, not your organization, you. And they want to know what you did, what you created, what you implemented. And the passive voice can be helpful to avoid the we us collective language trap. So, for example, instead of saying we created a new intake system, you could use the passive voice. This way, you're not taking credit. You're not just changing we to I. You say instead, a new intake system was created, and I focused on the user training. You're still showing the team effort, but you're making your role clear. Here's another example. The discharge protocol was updated across 3 units, and I was responsible for aligning it with the nursing workflow. See that? You're being professional, humble, and still showing your impact. Avoiding the we us trap, it's not about just changing pronouns. Sometimes you have to shift from active to passive voice. So use the active voice when it's your action, but don't shy away from the passive voice when it helps clarify your role in a team project. So, what's the takeaway here? Grammar is not about being perfect. It's about being intentional. And I really want to reinforce that because it's something that I've learned not just working with more than 1,000 clients getting ready for interviews in second languages, but my own experience as a second language speaker. I think that it's really about in an interview helping the interviewer understand your strengths clearly and confidently, but balancing that confidence with the politeness and respect for the interview process and the fact that you're interviewing, not starting. I think it's important to note native speakers don't know these rules, but they hear the difference. So, this is about being aware not so much of your accuracy, but of your tone, because the way that your message lands in the interview really matters. And these small grammar shifts, like choosing would over will, using present perfect to highlight your accumulated experience instead of past simple, avoiding the active voice we trap and using the passive voice strategically, it can really help the way that your interviewer interprets your experience. So now let's put this into practice. Pop quiz time for you. You wanted a grammar video, so of course you've got a grammar pop quiz, right? I've got a quick grammar challenge that I want you to do. I'm going to share 5 sentences from interviews that we'll say are unoptimized. right? Each one includes something that should be changed based on what we've talked about today. Take a look at these and write the correct version in the comments. I'll take a look. We'll take a look at the sentences one by one. Here's the first. If selected, I will begin improving the patient intake system. 2. I worked with interdisciplinary teams and would bring a lot of experience to the table. 3. We completed the transition last quarter. 4. I will clarify expectations at the beginning of a project in this company. 5. We redesigned the scheduling system to reduce appointment overlap. I focused on building templates for weekly workflows. So take a look, give it a shot, and in the comments, rewrite these sentences using the most appropriate grammar. It's important to note that as they are now, they're not grammatically incorrect, but grammatically unrefined. So your task is to optimize these for tone so that they come across as polite and respectful to the interview process. I'm going to put them up, all 5 of them, again on the screen so that you can pause and transform these and write the correct optimized version in the comments. Of course, we must admit interview preparation goes far beyond optimizing grammar. I really hesitated to make this video, but I've seen so many advanced speakers fall into these traps. And I really do believe that a clearly refined message can speak through grammatical mistakes. No grammatical structure is going to move you from interview to offer, but intentional, thoughtful, strategic preparation, identifying your story and how to package it so it's best understood by an interview. That's the way to show up confident and prepared. So, if this video helped you understand how to speak respectful in an interview and to be respectful of the interview process, give it a like and be sure to subscribe so Omni Interview is on your team. I regularly publish new content and check out Omni Interview's YouTube channel. There's a lot of great content, more associated with storytelling, sample answers, frameworks that you can use in your interview. And that will have much more impact than grammatical structures. Remember, the interview isn't an English test, it's a you test. So start from self awareness. Check out the channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time.